Seemingly good news for the Australian economy. The unemployment rate stayed steady at 5.8% when all thought it was going to go up. But is it good news? Really, I'm joined by Callum Pickering, who's Business Spectator's economics writer. Callum, numbers not as good as people thought?
Unfortunately, Jackson, it's pretty much all bad news for the Australian economy today, with the labour force figures showing that employment dropped by 4,800.
Right, and where were those job losses coming from?
It mostly came from part-time employment, which was down about 27,000, which more than offset the rise in full-time employment. Most of the job losses were for men. Actually, I don't 100% know whether that's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Offset the rise in full-time jobs.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing, surely. If full-time jobs are going up, that's a good sign for the economy.
It can be, but we don't know the dynamics of the job market. We don't know whether the people losing their part-time jobs are transitioning into full-time employment or whether they're simply joining the queues of the unemployed.
Right, and Joe Hockey came out and said, though, this is a good sign that growth is still strong in the Australian economy and that the conditions, as set out by the new government and their budget, is a sign that things are working well.
Well, I don't think any time that employment declines is a great time for the Australian economy. The fact is the Australian labour market remains incredibly weak by historical standards. And indeed, the government's very own forecast derived from the budget suggests that employment growth is going to remain very weak for the next 5 years.
Right. One of the things I noticed was that the participation rate has really fallen off in terms of the workforce.
Yeah, so that's been a trend we've seen over the past couple of years. In May, again, it dropped by 0.1 percentage points and is now at its lowest level in about 8 years. There's probably two factors driving this. One is an ageing population. More of the baby boomers are beginning to retire and that's weighing on the labour force. But there's also some discouraged workers, rather than looking for jobs, are now beginning to give up. And when they do that, they no longer count in the labour force survey.
Right. Now, one of the things that people are looking out for is the sort of mining cliff and the drop-off of unemployment for construction of the big LNG projects and the mining projects. What did today's numbers say about that transition away from that mining investment boom?
Bit of a mixed indicator in that regard. We see that Western Australia had quite a reasonable pickup in employment. It was one of the strongest states, which is probably not what we'd expect to see if the economy was rebalancing away from the mining sector. So far, that's definitely a work in progress, and it's got a long way to run before any of us can really be comfortable about the direction the Australian economy is heading in.
So in terms of those jobs that were lost, those part-time jobs that disappeared, where were they in the main getting removed from?
So by state, it was mainly New South Wales, which dropped a fairly large number of jobs in the month. Most of the other states were a little bit stronger with more modest decline, so it was mainly New South Wales that was driving it.
Okay, so in terms of how you're putting together your models for the Australian economy going forward, what's the prospects you see then sort of the next couple of months?
Well, it's not so much what's happened with the labour market this month that should be concerned. It's when you add that to what our other indicators are saying. We're seeing that retail spending, for example, has slowed significantly in the June quarter to date. We know that business investment is going to decline quite sharply over the next couple of years. We also saw that net exports was quite weak in April, and that was basically all that really drove growth in the March quarter. So all the indicators suggest that the economy is going to be fairly weak in the second quarter.
So you'd expect that we'd see a rise in unemployment as people had predicted for this month?
That's certainly a plausible scenario. I mean, one of the things we've got to bear in mind though is that the participation rate will continue to decline, and that's putting downward pressure on the unemployment rate. So what we could see is that the unemployment rate remains quite steady, and yet the labour market deteriorates as more people leave the workforce.
Interesting. Callum Pickering, thanks very much.
Thank you.